In other news this evening, a source has reportedly told CNN the Trump administration is considering sending ground troops into Syria. For more on whether the proposal has any substance or is one more reason the president is referring to the mainstream media as fake news, we're joined tonight by John Sitilides, is a global risk analyst and foreign policy principal at Trilogy Advisors. Nice to have you with us, John. What do you make of this report? Let's just say that it is verified and that there is some conversation about troops in Syria. We can quickly point out that this is something the president did not talk about on the campaign trail, and this would certainly change the dynamic with a number of different countries if the United States injected itself into Syria at a different level. What do you make of all of this?
You raise a lot of very important points, Ed, but I do have to take this as a somewhat dubious claim right now. There's been no validation of this report over the last 48 hours. And of course, the Secretary of Defense is in Europe telling not just NATO, but the world that there really isn't room for U.S.-Russia military cooperation at this time. And there are no ground troops to be brought into Syria when Russia controls all of the airspace in Syria and Iran essentially controls all of the ground troop movements with its own Shia militia and Hezbollah troops. So I find it very difficult to envision a massive infusion of ground troops. But having said that, Ed, keep in mind the U.S. does have about 40 special operations forces in the country, and they're helping out the anti-Assad forces that the U.S. has chosen to work with. There are about 5,000 troops in Iraq. They're in much more intensive combat-type operations. But perhaps there's going to be an expansion of the special operations forces in Syria. But I really cannot imagine any massive infusion of quote-unquote boots on the ground in Syria anytime in the imminent future.
And the scenario that you've played out, the dynamic of the air superiority right now and also in who is doing the fighting on the ground, we really don't even have a clarification of where the Trump administration wants to go with Assad. So if injecting troops into this would create more problems than it would solve, at least in the first month or so, wouldn't it?
I agree. But there is one thing. There's a political dynamic that I think is important to include here. Trump is trying his very best, whether one voted for him or not, to carry out his campaign promises. And one campaign promise that was his #1 priority in terms of national security was the defeat of the Islamic State. But he never came up with a plan to do it himself, nor would anyone, I think, realistically expect him to as a businessman. But he did say, and he has given the orders to Secretary of Defense Mattis, to have the military put together a plan that is credible, that can achieve the end outcome that President Trump is seeking here. And the details remain to be seen. I just find it odd that there'd be a leak right now about ground troops into a very untenable situation where not only Shia troops and Hezbollah troops, but also Turkish troops are there, making sure that the Kurds don't achieve any autonomy in northeastern Syria. And al-Qaeda is actually waiting in the wings for the defeat of the Islamic State so they can take over that element of the radical Sunni movement in Syria. So it's just a very convoluted array of forces, and I don't see any clean way for a massive infusion of American combat troops into Syria anytime in the near future.
John Sitilides, Trilogy Advisors, nice to have you with us tonight. Thanks so much for joining us.